I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest this afternoon, Katherine Mezzacappa. Katherine and I crossed paths 2 or 3 years ago when I had a random email from a British lady who had an Italian surname like my own. And she said that she had written a book which was based in Italy. And I knew instantly that she was going to be my kind of a person. And we've kept in touch periodically since that time. And she very kindly agreed to be a guest author on our writing retreat in Italy, and gave out some marvelous information to all our newbie writers, and set a little competition, a writing competition for a short story. And people got a huge amount from that. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So I'm going to read out your bio. This way. Katherine Mezzacappa is an Irish author living in Carrara, northern Tuscany, and I hope your weather is better than mine at the moment.
Oh, it's lovely here. Yes.
We've got snow on the mountains.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, in Tuscany. She holds a BA in History of Art, Master of Literature at ML Lit in English Literature from Durham, and a Master's in Creative Writing from Canterbury Christchurch University. Her debut novel, writing as Katie Hutton, The Gypsy Bride, made the last 15 in the Historical Novels 2018 New Novel Competition. And her short fiction has been short and long-listed in numerous competitions. She's been awarded residencies in Ireland by the Irish Writers' Centre and at the Danish Centre for Writers and Translators. You are building up some profile, young lady, aren't you?
And I like the young lady bit as well. Thank you.
And we're talking today because I couldn't, when I was asked to be on the book blog tour for this new wonderful novel, I just said yes immediately. The novel was actually released and published 24 hours ago, literally as quick as that. And so I just want to catch up with you and just talk about the novel and where the idea came from.
The idea for the book came from it was one of those accidental situations. Now, without going into a lot of detail, my younger son was having difficulty with school. He had a series of appointments with an educational psychologist. We rushed out one evening and we were in a rush, and I'd forgotten a book to read or a Kindle or anything. So I didn't want to sit in the doctor's waiting room for an hour fiddling with my phone. They had some gossip magazines, Oggi, Key, those kind of things that we see here in Italy. And they had one magazine, a medical journal, and this issue was devoted to erectile dysfunction. I thought, well, I'll read that instead. That must be more interesting, at least from the psychological point of view. And there was one little historical column, and in there it told of the dissolution of the marriage of Vincenzo Gonzaga to Margherita Farnese. This was in 1584. They were both teenagers, for non-consummation. In fact, the problem lay with the bride. She had, poor girl, what was called an obdurate hymen. Right. And ultimately she was sent off effectively by the man who became St. Charles Borromeo, into a convent in Parma, and she outlived everybody in the story. And Vincenzo, who was 20, started looking for a new bride, and he aimed for his cousin in Florence, Eleonora de' Medici, and her stepmother, who was not a nice piece of work, and said, well, perhaps the problem wasn't really with the girl, but with him. So we need a proof. We need to know that he is capable, I don't know how else to put this, of deflowering a virgin. And so the first minister of Florence was sent, the senior civil servant in Florence was sent around all the orphanages in Florence to look for a girl, and they found Giulia Albizzi. She was 20 years old. They cleaned her up, took a few days. She was in effect instructed about what was required of her, and this whole thing was carried out in kind of hugger-mugger way in Venice. She was taken to Venice under the pretense that she was the daughter of a German mercenary. And she was taken to this house in Venice, and this deed was, and the proof was obtained. I mean, it was practically public because at one point Vincenzo called out more or less to say that the fox was in his hole, and you know, the first minister came in and put his hand between the two bodies like this. I mean, it's a shocking story. She was rewarded with a husband and a dowry.
Yeah.
And I tell in the second half of I tell in the first half of the book the whole process that is based on the correspondence in the Medici archive, and then the second part, it's the fictional story of the marriage.
When you learned that, what was your first reaction? I mean, it's a sort of, oh my God, really? I mean, thank goodness we have progressed as a society since those days. You know, is there any justification for this? What were your thoughts?
I mean, my initial thoughts were anger, and there were some bits of the book that I kind of wrote in a bit of a red mist of rage. And some of the anger was to do with the story had come up periodically through the centuries, but was treated as if it was a comic episode. It was like something out of the Decameron, you know, the Countess Decameron. And I thought, no, this isn't a funny story. This is actually a tragedy, because when you read about, I mean, Julia hardly has a voice in the Medici correspondence. I mean, there's a bit where the Medici minister who's writing back to Florence constantly records that Julia has stopped eating. She's lost her appetite. She must be really excited about her good fortune. And I thought, no, I think that's fear. And, you know, the only time you hear her voice is when she's interrogated, and that's the best way to describe it, after the event. And she eventually kind of hides her face because it's just a kind of traumatic thing to go through. So I sort of wrote it in a way because I wanted to give her some kind of justice.
Right.
Because it's a kind of Me Too story, but you know, even if it is from centuries ago, it's still kind of valid.
But you do that. You do give her a voice, and as I say in my review, we start at the end.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hook, isn't it? So we're starting at the end, and she's saying, you know, this is what happened. You know, this is my memoir, if you like. And I think immediately you know that, gosh, you know, you're really going to get this, whatever happened to this poor woman, and you obviously find out when you read it how harrowing this story is going to be, really, don't you? I didn't know quite how I should feel when I read it. You know, you do feel shocked. You do feel almost guilty for your sex of being a woman, don't you, really?
Yeah.
That women could be put through things like this. And I think, you know, as I was reading it, I wanted to do a bit more research about women in Renaissance Italy in general. You know, was this typical? Was this normal? Was this likely? And yes, it really was. It really was, wasn't it? You know, women didn't really have a voice. They were just baby-making machines.
Yeah.
And as you put it, how did you describe it? A human test bench.
Yes.
It's incredible, really, that I'm even saying it. A human test bench for Vincenzo's proof of virility.
Yeah.
It is. It's absolutely shocking. But what you do with the story is that you bring her alive. You certainly do that. And I think by the time that we do get to the end, we do feel that, well, certainly there's a sense, I'm not going to give any spoilers, there is a sense of karma, you know, really. And she has had, in the end, not such a bad life. And was that always your intent to do that? That, you know, somehow, I mean, how would you ever get over anything like that, like rape? Well,
yes,
somehow you have to.
I did. I mean, when I started writing it, I thought I can't just tell the story. I mean, I want, and the second half of the book is fiction, complete fiction.
Yeah.
But I did want to give her a happy ending. I mean, she's dead, you know, I can't nobody can make redress for what happened to her, but I sort of wanted to make her happy, actually.
Yeah.
And it's but always with this idea that Florence was kind of looking over her shoulder, yes, in the person of that minister and his feelings about her. I mean, what happens to, again, not want to give any spoilers, but what happens on the way back from Venice to Florence is my invention. But when you read between the lines about what Belisario Vinter the minister was writing about her, he was saying things like, a man would have to be made of clay not to be moved by her. She's got this wonderful skin. Or the word he uses is chera, wax. And this idea that, you know, you touch wax and it marks. And but he was obviously, he was obsessed with her. Yeah. I mean, that comes through and on the way back, you know, she has nothing left. She's nothing left that's of value to anybody.
No.
And that, you know.
You left her, even though everything that she went through, you left her still very beautiful. Was that, how much of that was a conscious attempt to almost, I don't know, kind of not idolize, what's the right word, you know, immortalize, that's the word I'm looking for, that you almost wanted to immortalize this woman by everything that she went through and all the children that she did deliver in the end. She still, at the end, remained incredibly beautiful and had weathered a lot better than anyone else. And certainly the prince, as we discover, don't we, really?
Yes, well, I mean, we know that she was beautiful because she was chosen. I mean,
that's why she was chosen.
It was why she was chosen. Apparently, Vincenzo Gonzaga said, you know, any girl will do it. Doesn't matter what her body is like, but she has to have a beautiful face.
Right.
So, and that kind of comes up. That was his stipulation. This, you know, this young man. But I mean, she was chosen. I mean, Belisario Vinter, who went round the orphanages, said that the others were grubby. They had scabies. They were kind of awful looking, and then this girl wasn't. And there was also the bit about her looking noble. And I mean, she was an illegitimate child of the Albizzi family, probably. I mean, I don't present this in quite this way in the book, but she probably was, you know, a son of the Albizzi family impregnated a servant. That would be the common situation. I mean, not an unusual situation at all. So she was sort of presented there as beautiful. I wanted her to be beautiful towards the end, you know, as a woman in her 50s, because I thought, you know, that if we think in that age, 50-something would have been quite a great age to have got to anyway for most people. And but I wanted to really say that she was beautiful. Of course, Vincenzo, when he sees her at the end, can't see her properly. He's got cataracts or something, you know. So, but nevertheless, the kind of image of her is like that. And something about, you know, middle-aged women, frankly, can be beautiful, you know. And it would not have been, that would not have been the consideration at the time. But I suppose, you know, you write for a modern audience and you write as a modern person. And so that kind of becomes important. I mean, her beauty was, as it were, the only currency that she had. And if she hadn't been beautiful, she would have stayed in that orphanage.
It sort of reminds you of, you know, the comments about Helen of Troy, you know, her face launched 1,000 ships. You know, she was absolutely extraordinarily beautiful, as you say, and that's why she was chosen. But you did decide to give her love. You know, and I think that just, I mean, I love the way that every chapter you start with a wonderful quote. You really do. They're just gorgeous, aren't they? And it's chapter 14, and this is where Giuliano starts to take over. Husbands must love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man to love his wife is for him to love himself, which is a wonderful quote. And it's really nice and comforting for the reader to know that she found that love. She found that. And that's when, I mean, we're all married, well, living with people or whatever, you know, that's when you give your body willingly. so, you know, she's crossed the line from things being taken from her to wanting to be with her husband
Yes.
and
Yeah.
loving her husband.
Mm.
And that's a beautiful aspect to it. You must be so proud of this book.
I'm very pleased. I mean, it was the book I felt most passionate about,
Yeah.
you know, of anything that I've written. And you know, it was just so important to me. I wanted to give Juliana, I wanted to give the husband space as well, because you know, and him being a musician makes him of a very low social caste. I mean, he's about on the level of a butcher, so to speak.
Yeah.
He's from Rome, so he's a foreigner. So Florence the Tuscany can expel him whenever they want, you know. So he's a kind of pawn of these people as well. But I just, you know, I wanted him to be a decent person, and he turns out to be that. You
What
know,
was
he feels as real to me as she does now, you know, really.
the choice of names, Julia, Giuliano?
Yeah.
You just felt that they sort of fit together like a glove, or
Well, they sort of do, but that's accident, because Giuliano is mentioned by
yeah,
Florentine diarists.
yeah,
In fact, you know, subsequently I found out, because an historian in Florence has done the research, that wasn't his name.
yeah.
But that's for years that's where he appears. You know, I mean, the diarists gave various kind of conflicting reports about what happened to her. One was that she was left to kind of beg a crust from door to door and things like that. So, but so I just started with the mention of this Giuliano, who turns not to be Giuliano at all, but that he was this musician. He was a foreigner, and the names kind of do fit. But that was kind of pure accident, if you like, because she wouldn't have had any choice about who this husband was. Women didn't really choose about who their husbands were. They didn't choose if they were second or a third daughter or a bit supernumerary, really, that they were going to go into the convent or not. But that's where they went.
When I was trying to find a suitable image, and it always takes me a while, thank God for Canva, but I tried to find a really nice image, and I did find one. And then as I look closely, I mean, the flowers and some, you know, rosary beads, and it's all very nice and romantic. And then as a very sort of beautiful little piece of satin or silk or whatever. And then underneath, there's a music sheet. And I thought, I don't believe it. There's a music sheet. You know, this so fits, really. You know, this so fits. Can you tell us the story that you went through to actually publish the book? I mean, I know vaguely there were some hitches along the way.
There were, yes.
Can you tell us anything about that, and what a difficult time that was?
That was horrible, but it kind of all works out in the end. It doesn't feel like that at the time, but it was horrible, because the book was due to be published in September 2022
Yes.
by Impress, or Aylor's Press, who were based in Northeast England. And we did a lot of work on it, and you know, they seemed to be, you know, very keen, and all the rest of it. And then in July, the publisher went silent, and it turned out that he had gone out of business. So in these unhappy times, you kind of find yourself looking at, you know, the reports of bankruptcy and all the rest of it, or what was it kind of in the public eye. Anyway, he just disappeared, and didn't surface for months later. But there were all of his authors were in this situation, the already published authors. So the book was still born. So I had to start all over again looking for a publisher, and I found Fairlight, and I'm so glad I did, because they are absolutely marvelous. You know, that they did their own edit. Every publisher will do this. I mean, I looked at other publishers, and there was one publisher I know who's quite keen, but he said, we'll have to tone down the sex scenes. And I said, well, they're not sex scenes. This is what happened. And it's actually sexual assault. They're not sex scenes. Anyway, that didn't go any further, but I was so pleased to have found Fairlight. And they're just marvelous to work with, and they're putting a lot of effort into the book.
I remember you telling me about this, and I think it was the first time it dawned on me really how precarious the publishing industry was.
Yes.
Even for those writers, I mean, for anyone listening, even for those authors who have found a publisher, and you know, it's the holy grail. You've got a publisher, they're going to publish it. It still doesn't necessarily mean you've got to the finishing post, because you know, right now at the moment it is quite a, as we've said, precarious industry. So for the publisher to well, for something to happen to the publisher, and then you've got to start all over again. And then obviously there must be some legal things going on. Is it your manuscript? Is it theirs?
Yeah.
Can they sell it? Can you take it back? That must have been a really difficult time for you to go through.
I mean, I was fortunate because I got help from the Irish Writers Union, which is the equivalent of the Society of Authors. And I'm in the Society of Authors as well, but I went to the IWU because I'm a committee member there. So, and, you know, they were able to say, if they fail to publish, then contractually you get your rights back. The
And
more difficult thing.
You wouldn't have known that beforehand.
No, because you just don't.
No,
Yeah,
unbelievable.
you don't know that. And, you know,
No.
as far as I was concerned, you know, they could have just taken it and published it somewhere else, and I wouldn't have known. I mean, I don't think they were unethical. They were unfortunate more than unethical, but was that issue. So, but I think you do need help. I mean, there are reasons why there are places like the Society of Authors or the Irish Writers Union, all the author organisations that exist across Europe. And, you know, do go to them, because, you know, the cost of your membership is minimal compared to, you know, the quality of the advice that you get. But there was more difficulty with places like Amazon. In fact, there's a kind of ghost image of the old book on Amazon, and it took ages for us to persuade them to, this book doesn't exist. Well, the publisher has to tell me the publisher doesn't exist anymore. So, but I think it's still there, but the book's unavailable. So, you know, and it's a slightly different title, it's a different cover, those kind of things. But those kind of things can drive you nuts because they've nothing to do with common sense, you know. So
when you find another publisher, and you did find Fairlight, so then you're almost back to the beginning again, because obviously they need to do their own edit, and they discussed about the cover with you, that was you know, they put all those sort of things together. I mean, it must have seemed at one point that, you know, oh, I'll just give up with this book, you know, it's not going to go anywhere. And yet, you know, perseverance and, you know, and just tenacity. I've got to get this out. I've got to do this. You must be so relieved this weekend. You must be out there celebrate.
It's like, yes, lots of celebrations. Yes, because it's but you kind of need perseverance in writing anyway. I mean, you've got to have some kind of talent, I suppose, but you actually just have to not give up. No. I mean, I won't say on the record how many agents I approached before I got mine, but it was quite a lot. If I'd had the good sense to go through the Writers and Artists yearbook from beginning to end, I would have got to her quite quickly, because her surname is Green, Annette Green. But I went, I'll do an A, and then I'll do a Z, and then I'll do a C, and then I'll do a P, and this kind of thing. So there are quite a few. And there are stories that I've put out, the one of which I'm most proud. I must have put out to 20 or so publishers, and it is published. But so you just have to keep going. And the book I've got coming out next year with a publisher in the US, I had a lot of difficulty finding a place for that. I would say it's more difficult to find places for literary novels than it is for, as it were, what we call commercial novels. My Katie Hutton novels are, broadly speaking, commercial. This one, I hope, is on the cusp of being literary but being accessible. I mean, there are some literary novels I read and I thought, what the hell is this about, you know? Where's the plot, you know, and what's happened to the punctuation, these kind of things.
When you first, just give me the date then, roughly, or the year, when you first were with your son reading that article. When was that then? What?
That would have been, I think it was 2019. It was just before COVID.
2019.
Yeah.
So from 2019 to now.
Yeah.
So you're now celebrating. I mean, it's an extraordinary length of time, really, isn't it? It's like, you know, nurturing a child almost.
Yes.
Really. You know,
except
that
I did have several children from that point of view, because 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, I had 4 other novels out in that time. Plus a couple of novellas. So the Katie Hutton books are written in that time. I tend not to work on one book at a time. I'll have a couple going at the same time, which means I get stuck. I just go to the other one. So it wasn't as if all the time was being devoted to this book, but it was always there. So I was working on it, you know, and in
I mean,
alignment with the
I
others.
was interested as well. I mean, just looking at the bit at the back, yeah, there really was an orphan called Julia. And I was also interested, okay, these places, these orphanages, where did you get that from? And the Ospedale, the Hospital degli Innocenti, that is still there to
Yes.
this day in Piazza Florence. I really want to go and see this.
Oh, do, because they have a marvelous museum and they have these little pathetic little tokens, which were,
Yeah.
if you join them together, you would link mother to baby. The Coram Foundation has the same in London, so they're there as well. But I mean, they're so moving, and the Innocenti still exists to help problem families, to help families with problems.
I was
And
amazed.
it's just there. I can remember when I was visiting the museum there when I'd have been about 20, looking out of the back window, and there were a lot of pregnant girls in the courtyard. So it's gone for centuries and centuries, gone on that way. And I mean, it's not like that now, but in the older days, when you used to see child beggars in Florence, they would be taken by the police to that place to be looked after. So there's a continuity. And there's there's a museum of the Pietà in Venice, where Juliana goes to work. And that's still there. It's a smaller museum, and you need to book an appointment. And there's a Dr. Tommaso, can't remember his name, but he was marvelous, who will take you around that. And that was, of course, eventually Vivaldi's church, and he trained these girl orphans to sing. And there were the grills in the church, so the people coming to the mass and hearing them singing, they wouldn't see these little girls, but they would be singing through these grills. The ones who weren't good singers or good musicians, because they learned to be violinists and cellists and so forth, played the viola or whatever, the other ones would be lace makers. Right. So yeah, but these museums are still there, and the Pietà in Venice exists to help problem families. So the mission is there still.
Tell me about Dante's church, Santa Margherita, which is when Julia got married. Where's that?
It's right in the centre of Florence, and I'd actually missed it. Right. And there was a friend of mine, Claire Tansey, whom I met on an Arvin course, who showed me where it was, and we went to see it. So I chose that one because it's a simpler church, and it's slightly hidden away. And it would have been a bit kind of over the top if she'd been married in Santa Novella or something, So but also it was a church where I knew which paintings were in there, and I could refer to them because she's looking at and also the fact that it's Santa Margherita, because St. Margaret of Antioch was the patron saint of childbirth until Pope John the 23rd rightly decided that this was just a fable, because she was swallowed by a dragon, as you are. Yes. And she had a little crucifix, and she held up the crucifix, and it burst the dragon. Hence, she's the patron saint of childbirth. Yes. So we now have St. Gerard Maiello, who of course is a man, which is a bit problematic. But anyway, so it was appropriate that she should be married in that church. Where the real Julia was married, I don't know, obviously.
It seems to me you have all the components in this to make this a piece of literary fiction. I mean, I don't suppose it's a journey that you go on, deliberately. It's like all the sort of the forces conspire to make this. The research that you did, you knew how much of the story was already there, what existed, the buildings that you came across, the research, the papers, the people, the names. And then the clever bit is, okay, I've got the building, I've got some notes, I know that she really existed. The clever bit seems to be the magic dust that you sprinkle on all of these things to pull it together to get this amazing story. And I think
thank you.
It just works, doesn't it? It really, really works. Are you pleased with the other reviews that you've had from your book blog tour?
Yes, they've been lovely, and they've been really supportive. I mean, the book obviously went out on NetGalley. It was interesting. It seemed to be like Marmite. Some people absolutely loved it. Some people hated it. And the thing that they hated generally was that they thought I'd over-egged the sexual assaults, and I didn't over-egg. Those bits are more, not transcribed exactly, but as good as. I didn't actually want to, because I felt that if I leave anything out here, it's kind of negating what happened to this
Yeah,
girl.
absolutely.
But it is tough to read in some respects, and some reviewers have liked it, but said, you know, that there might be a bit of a kind of content warning, you know, trigger warning. So be aware that this is what this is about. So there was that, but I've been very pleased that I mean, Rachel's Random Resources, she does a great blog too, and she, you know, she found herself obviously, but
Yeah,
I'm
yes.
very,
But
very happy to.
if there are any books set in Italy, she usually just emails me, or, you know,
Right.
because I only do books set in Italy. Books in Italy, it's one way for me to combine my two passions. So it's just my thing. So, you know, I get to be on some amazing blog tours. But when I saw that one and I thought, it's Katherine, you know, she's got there with it. This is so wonderful. You know, it really is. Are you going to do some book signings? How are you going to, what are you going to do? How are you going?
I will be, I mean, I'm going to do various events. I've got the launch in Italy will be at the British Institute in Florence on the 20th of June.
Oh,
so I'm going to be there.
make a note of that. 20th of June.
That's right. Yeah, in the evening and at the British Institute. So
Will that be in English or Italian then?
it'd been English. It'd been English. Yeah. So, the book is going to be published in Italian because the contract isn't absolutely signed and everything yet. I won't say who it is, but it is going to be published in Italian. I'm so pleased about that. So pleased it is. And the book is in stock in Italy at the Paperback Exchange, which is the English language bookshop in Florence. So I'm really pleased about that they've got it there. And I'll be doing.
What about an audio version? Would that work?
I think it would work, yes. I don't know if Fairlight have that in mind. They've obviously got it out in Kindle as well. I mean, the Katie Hutton books were all out on Audible,
yeah,
which was great. And I loved the people, the voice talent who did them. Especially the lady who did the one with the Irish people in Annie of Ainsworth Mill, because I was quite insistent they got an Irish voice for that. But I don't know if Fairlight have plans in that regard. What I would really love between you and me and everybody that's watching is for this.
Don't tell anyone.
But you know, but I mean, I try to. I tend to, when I'm writing, I tend to see things as if I'm watching a film.
Right.
So I would love it if this was filmed or televised. Yeah.
It did occur to me. I think if it was, you know, there's been such lovely things that have been made into films that, oh, I don't know, just off the top of my head, one of Hilary Mantle's books about Cromwell, you know,
Yes.
and that was made into a film. And so beautifully done. I mean, I remember looking, you know, how they did that. And he just said, well, we didn't want bright camera lights. So we've just got candles everywhere because we wanted to evoke that period. And I agree with you. I mean, a film of this would be just magnificent, wouldn't it, really? What made you decide to switch over from Julia's voice to Giuliano's voice at some point? What made you decide to, I mean, I've never seen it done that way, really. Yeah, a memoir's a memoir. You don't get a switch, do you? Is that some I don't know, some writing?
I mean, the original version was with her and with him.
Right. Yeah.
We had a look, Fairlight and I had a look at just putting it all entirely into her voice.
Right.
And then we put it back again. Right. With some adjustments. And the reason for this is that, I mean, I wanted him to come alive, and the way that was going to happen, I think, was if he was able to speak for himself, but also because there were things that he would see and be in contact with that she wouldn't, because as a woman of that time, late 16th century, sorry, she would have lived within the home.
Yes.
You know, and
she
between there and the market,
those things, right?
She wouldn't have been out learning a living, you know, she wouldn't have been in contact with the kind of powers that be, except where they impinged on her. So in that respect, you know, he needed to give that, he was the only person who could talk about that aspect of their life.
And you get this dual perspective, which, like I say, you don't really see that often in a novel, do you? I mean, it's her voice through you, it's your voice through her, but then you add another dimension to this when you bring his voice in as well. And it's awfully clever, Catherine. You should be a writer. It's really clever the way that you've done this. I mean, it really does have quite a lasting, it's one of those books, isn't it? You know, I mean, I love holiday romances. I really do. But you can pick them up and you can put them down, and then you read something like this that really kind of stays with you for a while, doesn't it, really? And, you know, you're kind of thinking, well, thank goodness we don't have that kind of thing now.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we still have awful things happening to women, but, you know, at least you've given her a voice, and at least you've given her you've given her fulfillment, you've given her a life. And I still, you know, the quote that I put in my review of the silkworms. How did you know about that? Was that just research?
It was a search. I mean, it's just in a
How
way, well, in a way, what was happening in the orphanages in Florence is the equivalent would be the Magdalen laundries in Ireland.
Right.
Where women would go in and of course we're talking about little children in the case of the orphanage, but these women who were taken to the Magdalen laundries were made to work, and probably, at least, you know, in appearance, the people, the hotels and the businesses and so forth that put their laundry into these laundries probably thought that they were doing something charitable, or said they were doing something charitable. And in the case of the Silk Guild in Florence, having all of this work done by children or young women in the orphanages, you know, they were saying, we're doing this charitably because these children are being fed and looked after and all the rest of it, and they're not on the streets, all of that stuff. But essentially, they were getting their labour for nothing. So there's a kind of equivalent there. And I mean, somebody told me that in the Netherlands,
type thing. Really.
It's sweated labour in the Netherlands. I think it might have been lace or something like that. So, you know, it's and in London, in Coreham Fields, I mean, in the Coreham Foundation, I mean, the children were sent out to be servants. So you know, the children have to pay for themselves, or are made to pay for themselves, and this is what Julie was doing, you know, working in this place. But I read an awful lot. I mean, I had piles and piles of books and stuff. Yeah, and I also went, and of course I went to museums. The Museum of Textiles in Prato is illuminating.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a marvelous museum, and you know, the designs of the silk, and I mean, you think when you go into, you know how you go into the kind of Museo dell'Opera, the kind of museums attached to churches and cathedrals in Italy, and then these boring old kind of ecclesiastical vestments. But having written Julia, you know, and the research for doing Julia, I go and look at these things, and I think some woman or child in an orphanage made that stuff, you know, for this priest to wear, and that kind of gives it a different resonance, really.
How has writing the book and publishing it changed your attitudes, would you say?
That's an interesting question. I was going to say it kind of feels like my first real book, but that's wrong, because I'm very proud of the Katie Hutton books I wrote. This is the first kind of literary novel that I've written, or because that's what the market sees it as being. Right. I actually don't like the terms commercial fiction or literary fiction, all this kind of stuff. I like to think that I write literate fiction, and leave it at that, because I think there's a kind of snob thing about, you know, what kind of book it is, and that's often to do with some of the covers. I mean, one of the publishers that I approached with, not with this book, but with the Ballad of Mary Kearney that comes out in the States next year, wrote back to me and they said, well, I've looked at your other covers and they all look like commercial books, and we don't do commercial. And I wrote back and said, could you just please read the submission? I mean, the way that people judge books
Yeah.
I mean, this has got a marvelous cover. I love Holly Overton's cover, and I think she just does a super job of that. So, and a lot of people comment on that. You know, they've just loved the cover and they've gone to it. It's true. People do judge books by their covers.
Yeah, yes, they do, don't they? But I suppose it must be quite hard as an author. You don't want to be pigeonholed. And I guess
Yeah.
the same for, you know, for the film industry as well, and actors. You know, just because you've always done Shakespeare, you know, why can't you do comedy? Why can't you do something else? I mean,
Yes.
surely I'm not a writer, but surely you'd want to be thought of as having, as a writer, enough creativity and enough versatility to be able to write anything.
Anything. Yes. Yes.
Really. I mean, you know, I know some people just say, well, I write women's fiction, and that's as much as I want to say about the genre that I write in. I don't want people to say, oh, it's thrillers, or oh, it's you know, historical or romance. I write women's fiction, and that's as much as I want to say about
Well, because most authors actually do write women's fiction in the sense that most readers are women.
Yeah.
And that's just a fact. So, you know, but this term, I mean, the term women's fiction can also be used a bit derogatorily. I mean, there was an Irish writer. It was Joseph O'Connor who told me that one of Colm Tobin's novels, Brooklyn. He said there was some points of view that said that if that book had been written by a woman, it would have been marketed as a beach book. I mean, it really is not a beach. Brooklyn is not. I don't know if you've read the novel or seen the film.
No, I haven't. No.
I mean, it's a marvelous book, but it's not a beach book. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with sitting on but there's a kind of picture that you have of a beach book. I mean, I do lots of reading on the beach. And lots of falling asleep on the beach as well.
Who's driving this then? Is it the readers or the publishing industry? Who's
that's
driving
a moot point.
These, you know, I'm just on the sidelines of the publishing industry, but I'm always keen to see what the trends are. Where are we going with this? You know, is there anybody that's going to rival Amazon at some point for self-publishing? You know, and I'm really keen to see this. Who's driving this? These choices, the readers or the publishers?
It's got to be both, but it kind of depends in which degree. I mean, if you look at self-publishing, and there's a lot of snobbery around self-publishing, really unfairly, and there the reader is driving it. Right. But then on the other hand, the person who's writing the novel also has to think of themselves as being a publisher. As one of my colleagues who does self-publish in the Irish writers Union, he self-publishes very, very successfully. I mean, he sells many more books than I do. But you've kind of got to do both, but that's entirely driven by whether you can get you're completely in front of them. Whereas publishers are strange things, because I mean, they say in the UK that your book will be made if it's in Tesco or if it's in Waterstones. And that's you know, those two buyers of those two companies, one a supermarket and the other a chain of booksellers, really decides.
How do you feel about that?
Well, kind of resentful. I mean, this book is in some Waterstones, but what I really like about Fairlight is the close relationship that they have with independent booksellers. Yes. And I love independent booksellers because it's like going to boutique and getting some unique garment, which you wouldn't get, you know, going to let's say Marks and Spencer. And I love Marks and Spencer. Don't get me wrong, but there's something about big booksellers that, you know, it's like somebody else has decided what you're going to read, you know, because they've decided what goes on display. I mean, personally, I find Oxfam bookshops are the best source of ideas for me, because what you find in there is so serendipitous. Yeah. You know, and it's not, you know, decided by, you know, what the newspapers are thinking or what the buyer thinks is going to sell, because, of course, you know, so the problem is that books have to sell or the publisher doesn't survive, but it's about keeping that sort of balance. Do we just give the public more of, or do we produce something that's different?
It's tough at the moment, isn't it? Really, I'm sure it's a tough market for everybody. And what's your family thinking at the moment? They're all very proud of you, and I mean, it's just wonderful, isn't it? How do you feel about all the marketing? And you had an interview this morning, didn't you? You know, do you think, oh no, I'm going to be on Lorraine Kelly soon?
I mean,
Oh, I've got to talk about my book again. Oh,
it's it's a real honor, Wendy, when people are interested in your book and they want to ask you about how you did it. That's a real honor, and I feel really humbled by that. And I'm really pleased when in any feedback I get on any of my books. Like The Gypsy Bride, the first book that I published with Zarrelli, when a lady of Romany extraction wrote to me and she said, "Thank you so much, and you got everything right." Because people write about gypsies who aren't gypsies most of the time, and I'm not a gypsy. But I did do my research very thoroughly, and I spoke to people, Romany people, and said, "Is this right? What would you do here?" and all these kind of things. So I do find the feedback humbling, and I'm just honoured by it, really.
How do you find the research part of it? Is that the easiest bit? Or is that the most difficult bit where you just think, enough, I've got, my kitchen's full of papers now, enough, I've got to write this now. How do you just say to yourself, right, I've done enough research, I'm going to go for it? Or can you never do enough research?
I don't think you can ever do enough, but you need to know what to do with it. And I think, because when I wrote my first, well, it was my second novel, or maybe it was my third, I can't remember, but it depends whether you call the things that came before novels or not. But when I wrote The Ballad of Mary Kearney, I started on that because that's a book set in late 18th century Ireland, which was a more tumultuous time than, well, Ireland's always had a tumultuous time in history, but that was one of the most tumultuous, let's say. And I was reading books about that time as if I was doing a piece of historical research for an academic paper, and I had book tabs in these books and stuff. And I thought after a bit I thought, this is wrong, that's not what I'm writing, so let me just absorb a great deal and see what comes out, make sure it's accurate when you're doing your plot and stuff like that this happened then, or this kind of marriage would have been legal, all these kind of things, but just try to get the voice of it. And that's the most difficult. That was the most difficult thing, I think, with The Maiden of Florence, because here I've written a book in English, and the sources I were using were diaries and ricordanze, these kind of day books that people wrote. But I was having to translate them into English, or use English translations of them, and somehow keep the voice. Now, when I was writing the last novel I wrote for Zarrelli, which was The Maid of Lindell Hall, and that's set in 1930s Barrow and Furness. So the voice there, I had to get how Barrow people spoke. That was easier because my father was from Barrow, and there's certain phrases that people use that they wouldn't use, let's say, in Liverpool or whatever. But what I did then was, and I do this for any book, is I read as much as I can, or I read a lot anyway, of what people of the time would be reading. So for that book, which it was an historical novel, it wasn't a crime novel, but I took the particular decade of Agatha Christie, and I read a lot of her.
Right.
Because she has the voice of the time, the kind of turns of phrase that people would use, the kind of gentle swear words they would use, exclamations. She just gets the voice. And though I wasn't writing a crime novel, but that kind of seeped in. So you've got to kind of absorb it all and let it kind of work its way out.
There's a lot to this writing lark, isn't there?
Yeah, it's great fun.
And here's me thinking, you just pick up a pen. No, I know it's a lot more complex than that. But honestly, all credit to you. And thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
It's a pleasure.
Now. It's starting to get a bit, really misty over my mountain. I can't see the mountain at all today.
Oh, gosh, right.
I wish you every success with this. If I can get to Florence in June, that's not too far away from me, is it?
That would be fab. I must come down and see you. I mean, we talked about whether I would come on one of the retreats, but I think I'd just like to come for me, not to do anything, but just be me.
Do you ever venture ever further south than Tuscany? Do you?
Oh, yes.
Right, yeah. Okay. Do you know
my in-laws from the Molise, so from Campobasso, or near Campobasso, so yeah.
For goodness sake, pop in then.
I will.
Arrange a nice book signing or something.
Yes.
It's wonderful. I'm so pleased. I've been on this blog tour, and
Thank you for that.
I
Thank you,
can't
Wendy.
believe that, you know, we finally come together again.
Mm.
And, you know, and I've read it and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. So all credit to you. And
Thank you,
thanks
Wendy.
again
Thanks.
for your time today. Wishing you lots and lots of success. When it's made
Likewise.
into a film.
Oh yes, that would be good. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Right, I'll let you go and have a drink. Aperitivi time.
Yeah, why not? Yes. Bless you, Wendy. Thanks ever so. See
Ciao,
you soon, I hope.
Catherine.